Welcome back everyone, it's me again, Maximus. I appreciate you being here today. We're discussing some military aviation with the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-23 and MiG-27 family of fighter jets. And what a fascinating history lesson this is going to be today, because I love learning about old Cold War era fighter jets, especially from the Soviet era. And let's just get straight into it. So work on this aircraft, known as the Flogger, began in the early 1960s after a large number of MiG-21s and Sukhoi Su-7s had been supplied to the Soviet frontline air forces and tactical air defense units. At the time, these types compared very favorably with Western aircraft in terms of speed and maneuverability, but so far as weaponry, range and navigation and combat equipment, they left a great deal to be desired from the very outset. As there was little prospect of correcting these shortcomings, it was no surprise that when they issued specifications for the next generation of fighter bombers to come in use in the 1970s, Frontal Aviation, the Soviet Tactical Air Defense Strike Force, placed great emphasis on firepower, range and sophistication. The requirement was issued before April 1965, when the first engagement between the United States Air Force and North Vietnamese fighters heralded a new era in air warfare. The requirement did not call for greatly improved agility in air combat though. The standards set the MiG-21 would be quite inadequate. Instead, the new fighter would have to be having a greater endurance, a heavier armament and a much more powerful radar than its predecessor, and the air-to-ground strike mission was at least the most important part as air combat. Field performance was to be comparable with that of the smaller, lighter MiG-21. The MiG Bureau produced two prototype aircraft to the FA specifications, apparently sharing some common design features. One of these resembled an enlarged MiG-21, with the same mid-set delta wing and conventional tail, but to reduce the field length within reasonable bounds, it was fitted with two lift jet engines in the center section. The other, designated the YE-231, was a straightforward application of then fashionable variable sweep or variable geometry (VG) formula. The aircraft prototypes both made their first flights in the late 1966 and 1967 time period. By that time they appeared at an air show near Moscow in July 1967. The weight penalties and control complications inherent in the lift jet design had led it to its abandonment in the favour of the swing wing YE-231. Following the show, the Delta received the NATO codename Faithless, and the YE-231 was labelled the Flogger. Western intelligence at the time continued to track the development of the YE-231, including the construction and deployment of small pilot batches of Flogger A aircraft closely resembling the prototype. It was not until the early 1970s that the US Department of Defense could publicly confirm that the type was entering service in a quantity that its service designation was the MiG-23. This designation was previously attributed to the MiG-25 Foxbat, which by the way folks I have done a video on, so feel free to go check that out. Later in that year, the true production of MiG-23s entered service with Soviet units in eastern Germany, and photographs were leaked to the Western magazines revealing the design philosophy. The MiG-23 falls squarely into the group of VG aircraft conceived in the 1960s. All of them followed NASA's discovery that the fundamental problem of VG, the wings that moved aft as they are swept, creating a massive trim imbalance, could be solved without physically sliding the wing root through the fuselage as it had been done on earlier VG designs. By moving the pivots outboard, twisting and tapering the outer wing panels, and fitting a large and powerful all-moving tailplane, the trim problem could be kept under control without sacrificing the many advantages of VG. Maximum sweep could be sharper than was practical with a fixed wing, allowing for higher speeds at low level and was good transonic acceleration, while the spread configuration was efficient in subsonic cruise and provided really good field performance at high weights. VG made a particularly good match for the newly developed augmented turbofan engine. The turbofan's excellent thrust-to-weight ratio in reheat could drive a VG aircraft well above Mach 2. All of the VG aircraft designed in the early 1960s had augmented turbofan power plants, including the MiG-23 designated the R-27. Its engine was designed by the Tumensky Bureau, which had powered the MiG-19, the MiG-21, and most of Mikoyan's type prototypes. The basic YE-231 was a typically clean, straightforward design. The nose inlet featured on earlier MiGs gave way to side inlets. To make room for a more useful search radar, the inlets were very like those of the F-4, with vertical moving ramps and wide boundary layer ducts, which were efficient over a wide speed range without excessive weight or complexity. Thanks to the elimination of the full-length nose inlet ducts, the lean fuselage could hold a respectable amount of internal fuel in addition to the pilot, gun and avionics. The outer wings were hydraulically driven from 16 degrees to 72 degrees sweep, and would attach to the ends of a heavy structural box passing through the upper fuselage and above inlet ducts. The swing wing geometry of the original YE-231 was not unlike that of the General Dynamics F111, with outboard pivots, sizable fixed gloves, and the ailerons located close behind the wings at the same height position. Interestingly enough, in the interest of simplicity, there were no swiveling wing pylons, and the wing high lift devices were confined to full span, 3-section plain flaps, and drooped outboard leading edges. Overwing spoilers and large ailerons were used for roll control. One of the problems of the VG aircraft is the landing gear. Banished from its usual place under the wings, the MiG team arrived at the unique main gear design. The main wheels were suspended from 2 rigid beams, L-shaped in the front view, which were pivoted at the fuselage keel and swung upwards into the fuselage sides. This gave the aircraft a wide track but pronounced nose-up sit, which left no room for conventional ventral fins. Instead, a single large ventral fin was fitted, and this folded right up and upwards into the main gear as it was extended. Flight tests of this aircraft soon revealed serious stability and control problems in high-speed maneuvering flight, and full production was postponed while some drastic modifications were made to the basic design. Many of these modifications were incorporated in the first major production version, the MiG-23 MF, or Flogger B, which entered service in 1973. The MiG-23 MF was also designed to carry the new weapons and avionics which had been developed for this type. Glove pylons carried a pair of large air-to-air R-32R missiles codenamed the AA-7 Apex by NATO, while belly pylons were fitted with 2 very small, highly maneuverable R-60 AA-8 aphid missiles. Up to 1976, however, MiG-23 MS were often seen to launch rails with the older K-13 Alpha AA-2 ATOL missiles and the A-22 Advanced ATOL. In the lower fuselage between the intakes, the MiG-23 MF carried the newly developed GSH-23 cannon, a remarkable weapon with 2 ultra-short barrels and an effective range of about 1,000 yards or 915 meters, firing at a rate of 3,000 rounds per minute. A large nose radome housed the Soviet Union's first pulse Doppler fire control radar, named the Hilark by NATO, and a laser rangefinder probably for use for air-to-air gunnery. There was quite a few antennae placed on the tip of the fin, at the ends of the claws, and on the forward fuselage, betrayed the presence of comprehensive electronic countermeasures and surveillance equipment. As the MiG-23s entered service, another new version of the type was completing its trials. While the MiG-23 MF was designed to replace the MiG-21 in the tactical air defense role, the new version was intended to supersede the Su-7 ground attack fighter, and was extensively modified for the strike role. Designated the MiG-27, the new version appeared in the East German period of 1975 and was codenamed the Flogger D. The MiG-27 used the basic airframe of the MiG-23 but had a completely new forward fuselage. Shorter than the fighter's nose, it sloped more steeply ahead of the cockpit and offered better downward view angles. Its sides were completely armoured, and it housed a laser rangefinder and a small ranging radar and Doppler navigation equipment. The variable area inlets and nozzle of the MiG-23 were replaced by lighter fixed inlets and a simpler exhaust, reducing speed at high altitude but saving on weight. The glove pylons were retained, but the ventral pylons were moved to the outer inlet ducts to make room for larger stores. Another pair of smaller pylons were provided on the sides of the rear fuselage, possibly for countermeasures equipment or rocket-assisted takeoff gear. The MiG-27 is armed with a range of guided air-to-air missiles, or ACMs, and very little really was known about these missiles. It appears that they are seldom carried outside secure areas of the Soviet Union, and certainly not in East Germany. But the US Department of Defense has stated that the Soviet Union had developed 7 new tactical ASMs since the mid-1970s. They included the radio-communicated AS-7 Kerry, the long-range anti-radar AS-9, although this weapon is more usually associated with the larger the laser-guided AS-10 and guided glide bombs. Other improvements applied to the MiG-27 were also incorporated on the MiG-23 in the course of their production. These included the more powerful Temensky R-29B engine and the provision for fuel tanks under the outer wings. These were carried on fixed pylons and were designed to be jettisoned before the wings were swept back. With these 2 versions established in production, the Soviet Union's output of Floggers reached a peak rate of nearly 500 aircraft per year in the mid-1970s. By the end of 1982, it was estimated there was some 3,500 of the type that had been built. The result had been that the Soviets and the Allied air forces have been able to re-equip very fully and quickly the MiG-23 family, and it would be very fair to say that the MiG fighter was the main element in rapid improvement in the Warsaw Pact air power in the 1970s. All of the other members of the Flogger family stem from the MiG-27. The first of these appear is the MiG-23U or the Flogger C, a two-seat trainer version of the MiG-23 MF, with a slightly raised rear cockpit and a smaller radar. The MiG-23U is used for the trainers, and for the MiG-27s, other attack variants are used as well as for MiG-23 fighters, and some sources have suggested that similar two-seat aircraft may be used in the ECM and defense suppression roles. Middle East and allies of the Soviet Union were first export customers of the MiG-23. Egypt, Libya, and Syria were just a few, however received deliberately downgraded export models of this type. The first of these was the Flogger E fighter, which was derived from the MiG-23 MF in having a much smaller radar, probably related to the Jaybird system fitted to the later MiG-21s, and in being armed with an AA-2 ATOL missile. More recently, however, the export customers appear to have reviewed more potent MiG-23 MFs, a hybrid version of the family combining MiG-23 and MiG-27 features, which was first seen in 1975 and was at first thought to be a MiG-27 development aircraft. It soon became apparent, however, that this was an attack aircraft for the non-Soviet forces and was designated the MiG-23BN. It has a nose of the MiG-27 and the same duct-mounted pylons and enlarged main wheels. However, it has inlets, exhausts, and the gun of the MiG-23. The initial version was codenamed the Flogger F by NATO. The version supplied to the Eastern European Air Forces with additional antenna is identified as the Flogger H. This version is also being built under license in India alongside the Flogger C trainer. The first line fighter version of the MiG-23 was continuously refined. NATO applies the designation Flogger G to MiG-23s produced since 1978. These are distinguished by a shorter dorsal fin and a modified nose landing gear housed under the bulger doors. The most modern MiG-27 is known as the Flogger J, with some changes to its aerodynamics and a different type of antenna placed inside of it for an ECM suite. It also has been given a pair of gun pods under the wing gloves, with barrels which can be depressed for attacking ground targets. MiG-23s have seen action in war between Iraq and Iran and between Syria and Israel. Syria's Flogger E suffered heavy losses in action against the Israeli IAI Kaifer's General Dynamics F-16 in June 1982, but this was ascribed to the tactics rather than the technology. Generally, the M23 is regarded as a fairly well-equipped and capable aircraft, but much less agile than the F-16 that it was put against. Well, that's it for today, everyone. I really appreciate you stopping by and hanging out to learn about the MiG-23 and 27 family of aircraft. Clearly a lot of modifications and improvements made on the jet for quite some time, but of course it is definitely a superseded jet to today's standards, but it does have quite a legacy back in the old Cold War era for the Soviet forces. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please feel free to leave me a like and a comment as to what you think of this jet. And if you want to support my channel, go check out my Patreon page, which is in the description below, and also come hang out in my Discord if you want to have a chat. All the best, folks. See you next time. Bye bye.